Thanks to PC handhelds like the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally series, as well as the continued popularity of the Nintendo Switch, gaming handhelds are having a bit of a moment right now. Which leads me to an accessory I picked up a couple of months ago for my iPad Pro, and that's the Razer Kishi V3 XL. Now, the name's a bit of a mouthful, but this is a gaming controller that pretty much turns your iPad into an iPadOS powered gaming handheld. Of course, there are some costs and some trade-offs versus something like those devices I mentioned, but between this accessory and all of the improvements Apple's been making across all its platforms to make gaming better, I can honestly say this is the most fun I've ever had gaming on an iPad. While this video is more about the style of controller than this controller specifically, I do want to give you a mini review of the Kishi XL. The grip itself works with mid-size and larger size tablets, so that's iPads and Android tablets in the 10 to 13 inch range with a USB-C port. That's important to note. If you have an iPad with a Lightning port, you will not be able to use this controller. The iPad mini works with the phone-sized version of this controller that Razer's been making for a few years now. Even though the grip does work with 13-inch iPads, I've found that the 11-inch size is really what's most comfortable with this controller. The Kishi has two TMR thumbsticks in the off-center Xbox layout. TMR thumbsticks were new to me when I bought this controller, and I would do the technology a huge disservice if I were to try to explain it. But its benefits over Hall effect thumbsticks or the standard thumbsticks you find in like your PS5 DualSense or your Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons are that they offer a higher resolution polling rate, meaning that they will be able to register more minute movements. Now that is important in something like a competitive first-person shooter. That means that the thumbsticks are going to be able to register your movement without you having to physically press the thumbstick as much. Like Hall effect sticks, TMR thumbsticks also use electromagnetic sensors to essentially remove the stick drift problem that standard controllers can develop over time. As far as the D-pad goes, I'd say it's fine at best. I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. It's a little loud for my tastes, and it's a little too clicky, and in some ways feels a little bit cheap, but it gets the job done. I tested this by playing Mario 3 using the Delta emulator, and it did what it was supposed to do. I don't know if you can hear that, but again, I just really don't like how loud this D-pad is. Beside the standard A, B, X, Y face buttons, we also have a set of 3 buttons along the top here. We have the shoulder button, trigger, and then a third button for who knows what, but of course that's on both sides here. Along the back there are an additional 2 buttons, which I've never used because I'm not a back button guy apparently. Along the bottom of the right grip we have a standard USB port for pass-through charging that'll charge your iPad while you're gaming, which you will absolutely need, and a 3.5mm headphone jack if you prefer to use wired audio. Coming back to the front, there's an additional 5 buttons. The home button will toggle you between the Apple Games app and whatever your last game was. These 2 buttons here, the hamburger button and these 3 dots, are kind of like start and select on a Nintendo controller, or view and menu, whatever we call them today. There's a button at the bottom that you can hold to start a screen record session. And then this button on the bottom right will launch Razer's custom Nexus launcher for this controller. Now, I didn't spend a ton of time with the launcher, but I guess it can kind of serve as something as an alternative to the Apple Games app, in that it serves you recommendations, but they may be different than what Apple gives you through their app, and maybe more to your liking. A couple other interesting points for this app. The Kishi controller supports button remapping, and you access that by going into the controller settings in this app, and then going to each of the remappable buttons and changing them there. This is also where you would do firmware updates for the controller. There haven't been any since I've had this controller, but if there were, you would go into firmware here and download and apply those updates. Interestingly, there's one area where Android users actually win out over iPad users, and that's with haptics. This controller actually supports haptic feedback, but only on devices running Android 12 or newer. Hopefully that's something that is changed in future iPadOS updates. In the past few years, we've been seeing some AAA console ports coming to iPadOS, and I can't think of a better way to play them than with this style of controller, especially since external display support for games on the platform is almost non-existent. Games like Control, Ultimate Edition, or Tomb Raider feel incredibly natural to play this way. In the past, I've tried using a stand and a Bluetooth controller, but for me, that experience really just doesn't compare to holding the iPad in your hand some way. Now, I'm about a good 10 hours into Control on my iPad Pro, and I don't think I've ever put anywhere near that amount of time playing any game on my iPad. It's really easy just to put my iPad in the grip and almost forget that it's an iPad that I'm gaming on. That being said, even though iPads are pretty light, especially the iPad Pro, the combination of a tablet and this controller is going to be heavier than pretty much any gaming handheld. I don't know that I'd go quite as far as calling it heavy. I mean, obviously it's at least a pound because the iPad Pro is a little under a pound, but it's going to have more heft than some people would like in their gaming handhelds. For longer sessions, I find myself just kind of resting the iPad on my stomach, not just because of, having a gut, but because of the iPad's aspect ratio. It actually was pretty comfortable to play this way. I really appreciated the pass-through USB port on this controller because if you're going to be using your iPad like a gaming handheld, there's a good chance you're going to be getting battery life like a gaming handheld. I found that by playing Control Ultimate Edition on my iPad Pro, I was getting maybe 2.5 hours before I found that I had to plug in because my iPad was kind of in the mid to low 20% battery range. Of course, it did have all the graphic options cranked up, which will impact battery life, but that is something to note. Now I pretty much will play that game plugged in. Now I'll talk about software a little bit more in a minute, but the way this controller integrates with the new gaming overlay in iPadOS 26 really sells this kind of illusion, if you will, of the iPad as a gaming handheld. It's a small thing, but I like that if I'm playing at night, just kind of laying in bed before I go to sleep, and it's dark and I want to adjust the brightness, I can quickly trigger the overlay with the home button on the controller, change the brightness, and go back to my game, all without ever taking my hands off the controller itself. Really, the biggest issue I ran into with this controller, and I saw this both on iPad and Android, is that sometimes if you let the tablet go to sleep while it's still in the grip, when you wake it up, the controller won't be responsive and you have to reconnect it. Okay, so that section was mostly positive. What is the catch with this controller? Well, the catch is that the Razer Kishi V3 XL is $200. That's right, this controller costs $200. At least it is at the time I'm recording this. The cost of everything is going up right now, so it may have changed by the time you see this. For any controller, that is insane. It is more than half the price of the base iPad just for the controller alone. And that's a pretty huge downside to this whole setup. But really with this video, it's less that I'm suggesting anyone go out and buy an iPad and this controller instead of a handheld. But it's really if you already have an iPad and you want to take your iPad gaming to the next level, or you want something like a handheld experience but don't want to go out and buy another device, that's kind of where this comes in. But I don't want to pretend that this isn't crazy expensive. I mean, the hardware is good, but $200 is kind of insane. Now I want to talk a little bit about the software aspect of this whole setup. If you're following the handheld PC gaming space, we're seeing Valve and Microsoft putting a lot of effort into making their desktop OSs behave more like an OS on a gaming console. Meanwhile, Nintendo's over here just making everyone look bad with how dead simple the Switch OS is to get into the Switch and into your game. Between those two extremes, I find iPadOS, unsurprisingly, to be somewhere in the middle here. Yes, it is a general purpose OS, but it's not as heavy, either technically or from a user interface perspective, as something like Valve's SteamOS or Windows on a handheld. There's relatively little friction in getting into your iPad and getting to your games, especially if you're leveraging the Games app as something of a launcher or gaming dashboard. One of the things I hear people complain about a lot on Windows handhelds is the update situation. How you have to go into multiple places to get driver updates, game updates, and OS updates. On iPadOS, obviously the situation is a lot simpler. You have OS updates and settings, and everything else in the App Store. And that's it. And App Store updates happen in the background, so you don't really even have to manage that. And more importantly, you're never going to get harassed in the middle of the game about having to perform an OS update that you don't want to do. iPadOS largely stays out of your way in that regard. Like I mentioned earlier, alongside the Games app that came in iPadOS 26, we also got this gaming overlay, and that can be invoked from a hardware button on supported controllers or from Control Center itself. To me, it feels like a lighter weight version of the overlays that you get on other handhelds like the ROG Ally and probably the Steam Deck too at this point. I got rid of my Steam Deck a while ago, so I don't have one on hand, but I'd be surprised if they didn't have something like this. You get access to all of the game's Game Center stats and achievements. You get quick access to contacts, and my favorite feature, of course, are the quick settings. And this lets you get to some of the settings you might want to change in the middle of a game, like your display brightness and volume. With the Razer Kishi, it's nice because the overlay is fully navigable with just the thumbsticks and buttons. I don't have to reach up from the controller if I don't want to. Another nice benefit of the new multitasking in iPadOS 26 is that using windowed apps, it's actually pretty easy to, while you're in a game, pull up, let's say, a browser or maybe even YouTube, find a guide if you're stuck somewhere, figure out what you need to do, and get back to the game. The most important aspect of gaming on your iPad is, of course, the games. Now, compared to the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally, you might think the iPad is at something of a disadvantage because there's no support for Steam. And that's true. If most of your games are in your Steam library, then gaming on your iPad is going to be kind of limited to just streaming your Steam games from your PC to your iPad using something like Steam Link or some other remote play solution. I would, of course, argue the iPad isn't at as much of a disadvantage as you would think. Between the games available in the App Store, the games you can put on your iPad using emulators, between cloud streaming solutions, and the remote play options I mentioned, you actually have a pretty good selection of titles that can be available to play on your iPad. And before you say it, yes, a lot of the games in the App Store are predatory in-app purchase traps, but there are also some really solid games in the App Store as well. If we go back to those AAA console ports that have been coming to iPadOS, the list has been steadily growing. You know, we have titles like Death Stranding, Assassin's Creed Mirage, Red Dead Redemption, Control Ultimate Edition, Resident Evil Village, and I'm sure more are coming thanks to Apple Silicon and the gaming push Apple has been making on the Mac that the iPad also benefits from. And while I'd be lying if I said I was a heavy Apple Arcade player, it does present some solid options for games that don't have in-app purchases and can be played offline. Now, with such amazing hardware in our iPads, you might wonder why there aren't more of those AAA console ports. The reasons ultimately come down to Apple. One, there's that 30% cut that Apple takes out of all digital purchases in the App Store. Steam takes that same 30%, but the developer consensus is that you get more for that percentage from Valve than you do from Apple. The other big hurdles are App Store rules. If you bring a game to iPad or iPhone, that game has to work with just touch. You can't bring a game and have it require a hardware controller. I'm not a game developer, so I don't know how hard it is to add touch support to a game, but it's work either way. And if your game has already been developed to work with controllers, and now you have to add another interface on top of that, that's a hurdle that a lot of developers either don't want to do or can't afford to do. Sometimes Apple decides to change those App Store rules for the better. For example, a couple years ago, they changed the rules around emulation, and now you can have game emulators officially on the App Store. I did a video a while back about the popular Delta emulator getting proper iPadOS support, which I'll link to somewhere here. But for those of you who prefer to play retro games, which is a lot of the conversation I see around gaming handhelds, iPadOS is now a viable option for playing games from the NES, SNES, N64. I'm not actually sure how far the emulation scene goes, but most people I see stick to like the 8 and 16-bit games, and of course, any iPad you use with a controller like this is going to be great for those classic games. The point of this video isn't to convince you to throw away your Switch and move all your gaming to your iPad. Mostly, I just wanted to highlight how, with the right accessory, you can transform your iPad from a good gaming experience to a great gaming experience, which is really the story of the iPad in general. The right accessory really can transform this slab of glass into whatever you want it to be. That's going to do it for this one. As always, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you. I appreciate you and your time. If you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, that would help me and the channel out just a ton. And with that, I will catch you all in the next one. Thank you, and take care.